Continue. Okay, we should be good now.
Okay, wonderful. So hello again. My name is Calantha Tillotson. I'm the liaison for the School of Information Sciences, and my preferred pronouns are she, her. I will be, talking today about kind of some tips and tricks to job seeking and kind of my own journey through the process. Through my series, Coffee with Calantha, that lovely Amy and Julia have worked with me on, and so I very, very much appreciate you both. So let's get started. I started out actually as a summer intern at my local public library in tiny little place called Andover, Kansas, which is just outside Wichita, Kansas. My mom had started working there not too long before then. So I was like 15, had mostly just done babysitting and stuff like that, but lived at the library anytime I could. And so it was this tiny little shack, not even kidding. It was like a tin shack. It was like mostly one big room. And they needed someone to come in and help with the summer reading program. And I love kids. I did a lot of nannying and babysitting. And so I was like, I love books. I can do this. I can totally do this. And so I went in, I dressed up nice for the first time in my life. And went in. I was interviewed by all these different librarians. I definitely was very sweaty, very shaky. My mom wasn't in on the interview, which was good because that would have been very awkward. And then I just kind of hung around the rest of the day until the director came out, I don't know, 4 hours later. And she was like, oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you, you got the job. And I was like, oh, good. Well, I was sweating it, you know. Luckily, there was a lot of reading material there at the library, so I kept myself occupied. So it was really, really fun working there. I was only able to work there a summer, unfortunately, but absolutely loved working with the summer reading program and with the kids. And that was my first introduction to doing reference and circulation because I also worked at the front desk. Fun story, I accidentally hung up on the mayor of our town because nobody taught me how to use the phone. So I hung up on somebody who we were trying to milk for money because they were trying to build a new library. So luckily he thought it was hilarious because I was very comical and being like, oh. So it worked out, but I definitely taught me that training is very important. After I graduated high school. Oh, yes. And please ask any questions that you have through the process. Oh, Julia, you did that too. I know. It's always just this kind of whoopsie. I promise I know how to use the phone. Just very
It's
awkward.
like the hold and transfer. I don't know.
I know. And it made me feel like I was using an old rotary phone. I was like, what is this even? So yeah, it's very hard. But anyway, so I graduated high school and I started my English degree because again, love books. I love talking about books. So it was the best degree I could do. So I was actually English ed at the time and I needed, to make money so I could live. And so I went back. I'd heard of this job. I was going to the Butler Community College at the time to get all my undergrad, the first general education class out of the way. And I kind of stumbled into finding out there was a work study opportunity open that at my old high school, because it was actually the whole building was a combined high school and community college, which shows how small of a place I come from. But it was a really awesome opportunity because I got to start working with both levels. I did a lot of inventory. We had this novel room, textbook room, doing ILLing. I learned cataloging and learned I really, 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 really should never do cataloging in a million years. It was not only was I not good at it, but also I hated it. So it was just all around bad. But I learned that I really excel at reference and being able to have people come up, ask any question under the sun, and then figuring it out. And so yeah, it was really fun. And then also, obviously, I just graduated there the year before, and then I come back, and all of a sudden my teachers are coming in too, and my college professors, and I was like, I don't even know how to talk to you right now. They were like, oh, you're an adult now. Call me by my first name. And I was like, that's not how it works. I'm just gonna, no, you're always going to be your last name for me. But it was very fun. And I got to work with there was the director of that library who was this fiery prairie woman is what I call her. She was just the best boss I've ever had because she really, really cared about her employees. And she stood up for them. She wanted to mentor them. She was the one that told me to not become an English teacher because I quote, they would eat me alive. So I ended up, which was a good advice. And I'm very glad that I didn't. But But I ended up becoming a librarian, and she actually really encouraged me into it. That was when I suddenly discovered I was like, oh, I could do this as a living. Like I could really do this and I could enjoy it. And the other people that I worked with were all retired librarians from like the local school district. And so I got to like have just the richness of experience and of like library history. And they all were really incredible mentors. And so I actually worked there for 5 years, like all my undergrad and then an additional year before they finally kicked me out. They're like, girl, go move away, go do grad school. I was like, but this is so fun. They're like, there are other libraries you can work at. It's fine. Which is how I ended up at the University of Oklahoma, where I got my master's in library and information studies. And I actually went through the process of interviewing for a GA-ship, actually. They had one that was just like part-time that was open. But I was like so excited to be able to work. It's beautiful. If you haven't been to Norman, Oklahoma, that's fine. You don't need to go. But if you do ever end up there, go to Vizell Library. It's absolutely gorgeous. They have one of those big, huge, old-fashioned, like great reading rooms with like stained glass windows and vaulted ceilings and like, angel statues looking down at you. And just, it's awesome. It's also supposed to be a quiet space, and I'm not quiet, so that was fun. And actually, what was fun about going through that interview process is I was just, I mean, I was nervous every time that I've interviewed, but for that job in particular, that's how I was able to get my library degree. Like, if I didn't get a GA-ship, I would not have been able to afford to go through the program and also live and eat food and all of that. And so I just remember putting so much pressure on myself to prove in that like 30 minutes that I was the best, goddamn, oh, sorry, I'm cursing, but the best, like the best library student there's ever been. And I really, really wanted to, be there. And it was so much pressure and I sweat so much and my face was so red. And I had this like probably very terrifying, like brightness to my eyes, but they hired me anyway. So it worked out. And I was able to work there for 3 years. And again, I got to do reference. I got to work. I was actually there while they switched from being like the reference department to being subject specialist in student success, which is mostly what you see now in academic libraries. So I got to hear all the grumbling as they were going through the process. But then also I got to again teach classes. I was doing entry level. I got to give tours, which I absolutely loved. Definitely started at least 2 ghost stories in the library. And then when I went back to visit several years later, I took a tour and they told one of the ghost stories. And I was like, I have arrived. Like I did my job. Yeah, and I also worked like the night shift at the research desk. So if you can imagine the reference questions I got during that time, it was absolutely crazy. But yeah, working at that GA ship, I will say that was a lot of pressure, but it was actually one of my like quote unquote easier like interview processes because of the fact that it was only 2 people that were interviewing me. Those would be like my direct supervisors, and they were very like they mentor like library students constantly. So they were very encouraging. They were very open hearted. They were like, like tell us about you. Like, why do you want this? Not, always me trying to prove, my worth in that moment. So I can say that was very helpful. Then I got on the job market, and as you can imagine, that was very scary. And I was applying for academic jobs, which meant if you have not gone through one of those processes, those are usually at least a full day event, if not 2 days if you have to travel for it. And so I ended up interviewing at a couple of different places and chose East Central University, mostly because it wasn't like too far away. It was still in Oklahoma, and because I got to do instruction. And my last position really taught me that I loved doing instruction, and I wanted to continue doing that and research assistance. And I got to be a liaison while I was there too, and I got to be a boss, which was like way too much to do, but I loved the fact that I got to get skill sets in all of those different areas. And I mean, it was hard. Like now that I've gone through like the interview process in academic libraries 3 times, I can say it is so hard. You really got to pace yourself. And I'll get into my tips here in a second, but just be prepared. You're going to be there for like, if you're not if you're just driving, it's going to be like probably 8 hours. If you are, like having to travel out of state, like it's maybe close to like 48 hours. It's a long, grueling process. Make sure you hydrate, make sure that ask for breaks if they don't give them to you, because you'll be meeting with anybody from like the provost to like the staff that would be and the students that would be working with you. So So anyway, so I worked there. I was there for 5 years, which was purely by accident. But it was actually because I started applying for jobs January 2020. Who could have known? Who could have known that things were going to explode? I did. We all found that out. And so the jobs that I was applying for, they had just kind of all disappeared at the same time as they closed searches, which really sucked. But I was glad to at least have that experience. Of going through the process. And actually, that was the time when I started interviewing through Zoom because they, like it was right around the time that they were like, okay, well, before we bring you across the country, because I was interviewing for places on both coasts, they were like, we want you to, try doing some Zoom interviews, which is a completely different experience. And I'm happy to answer questions about that too, of being in person versus trying to do Zoom or over the phone. But I finally, I was able to start that search over again after like a year and a half. And I told myself that I would still apply to the same types of places on both coasts. And I ended up applying for the University of Tennessee because I absolutely loved being a liaison. And I'd made a list of like the things that I loved about the jobs that I'd had so far. And all of them kind of fell under the umbrella of liaison and specifically social sciences and humanities. And so, yeah, I went through the process of applying here all through Zoom because again, it was still, I was applying in 2021. But then one of my negotiations was to be brought on board because like them fund a trip so I could come and see the library and meet everybody in person. Because otherwise I was like, I don't know who you are. Like you might be terrible people. Like I need to actually like, I don't know, eat lunch with you or something. And so I can recommend that if you are doing a lot of like distance interviews, make sure that you get an opportunity if possible to meet people in person. Especially if you're not familiar with the geographic area or the university. So, did I get any questions? Did I miss anything? Okay, here we go. Oh, good. Yes, Sydney, I've done that too. Transfer the wrong way. DR RA positions are a godsend. I 100% believe that. And yes, ghost stories. If you can come up with a ghost story, totally do that. Oh, it is such a process, Gabby. I agree. It is you got to prepare. That's one thing that when I talk to people who aren't in academia, they don't realize like, oh, you have to actually like show up and not just answer questions once, but you are showing up and answer questions like at least in 5 or 6 different groups. And even when you're just like going to lunch, like or walking with people, you're still being interviewed. And also you usually have to do some kind of presentation or do some kind of like, something in which they have to see what you're capable of. And so it's a very grueling process. Worth it, I would say, but very grueling. Okay, so here are my top tips. I could not have gotten any of my jobs. I mean, I say that I probably would have gotten the jobs, but I wouldn't have been able to go through the process of interviewing as well if I hadn't found my mentors. And that's peer mentors too. And I can recommend not only finding mentors that are in your particular field. So if you're talking about becoming a public librarian or an academic librarian or school librarian, like finding people who've already gone through that process, but also maybe finding somebody who has just recently gone through that process versus somebody who interviewed maybe like years ago. It's going to be very different. But you also want that knowledge too. So make sure that you have a good span of mentors. Be intentional about like finding them and talking to them and sharing expectations and making sure that they know like this is more than just like a friendship or like a professor like student relationship. Like you're looking for a mentor because that is a very different kind of time commitment than it would be otherwise. But also find people who are in academia or like, okay, so for example, if you want to work in an academic library, find other academics that are not librarians because they will still teach you a lot about the going through the university process. And then you have even more people to practice with, which is one of the other things I have on here, which is practice, practice, practice. I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd. I don't know if you can tell, but I definitely, it didn't matter that it was like my third time going through, like the interview process within a month. Like I was still going to make sure that I was prepared and that I could have like one of my friends on the other line who's like asking me questions so I can compose myself, or my mentors really. And that's when the mentors come in really handy because they've been through it. They know how to look intimidating if possible. So it's very, very helpful. The other thing I want to recommend is before you even start applying, make sure that you brainstorm your wants versus your needs. So make sure that you have an idea of, I mean, obviously your first job, even your first couple of jobs are not going to be perfect. No job is going to be perfect. So, but you need to have an idea of like, what are the things that are negotiable for you? And what are the things that you would absolutely need to have included, both in like job descriptions, but then confirmed by individuals who are like interviewing you. So for me, when I was going through this process, one thing that was really important to me, this was the first time I was interviewing like outwardly as a queer individual. And so like I had my rainbow flag behind me before I even interviewed for a job, like, or even applied for a job. I made sure that I looked and say, you know, like, what kind of diversity stance do they have at the library or at the university level? What kind of like pride center do they have available? Like, what are the resources? How is this going to work? That was non-negotiable for me. Like, I wanted to move somewhere where I had you know, that was something that was not just tolerated, that was nurtured. And so of all the places, I ended up in Tennessee, UT Knoxville, but you know, it's a wonderful environment here at the library, specifically in my department. You know, like I don't have to be the only LGBTQ individual, even within my own department, and that's incredible. And so that was just like example of one of those things you might do, but actually create a list. Like that was what was helpful for me. Is so then when I went in to look at the job offerings, I was able to say, okay, this doesn't have that. Like I was like, I know I want to teach, I know I want to do reference, I know I want to be liaison. So if it has nothing to do with that, that's not negotiable. I'm not going to go through the process of applying. The other thing is create an organizational strategy. I have, again, so much a nerd, but I have a home built Excel file that I've used. And if you're interested in looking at it and, you know, doing something similar, where I had an idea of like, okay, because when you go through the application process, as you well know, I'm sure, it is a full-time job. Like you have to be able to keep track of like, when is everything due? Where have you applied? Where are you at in the process? Because especially for academic jobs, there's like 4 steps, if not more, of not just applying, but then all the interviews that you have to do, all those different rounds. So I actually had it color coded depending on have I done the phone interview versus the, you know, Zoom interview versus the in-person interview. And like where it was located, because that was important to me. I actually made a map and I color coded depending on like where I would be willing to move. But again, I was not tied down geographically in the sense that like I was willing to move across the country for a job, and not everybody has that. So you know, I want to note my privilege in that situation. But the other thing is like do your research and take your notes. So make sure that you have a really good idea of before you go to the interview, take the job posting and rip it apart. Like make sure that you make notes, highlight, like but basically put in the margins. That's what I would do is put in the margins. Here is how it directly applies to work that I've done or interests that I have. Like here's the examples. Make sure you use as many examples, specific examples as possible, because that's gonna like bump you up when it comes to whether or not you can stay in the pool of possible you know, applicants. The other thing is make sure other people, I mean, you already know this, but make sure other people have an eye on your materials before you submit them, if at all possible. Make sure you cultivate your references and you make sure you warn them. So like if I knew I was going to be like, I'd gotten through the first round and I knew for sure that my references were going to be called, I would send them an email saying, hey, here's where I've applied. They're probably going to be contacting you. And here's like the job itself. So they could prepare and have a good idea of like, okay, this is what, you know, this is what she actually wants from this job. So that was, I've heard from them that it was really helpful. And then the last thing that is certainly not least, remember your worth and be prepared to verbalize it. This was something that I actually had to have kind of like consistently. I had sticky notes from my mentors and like my peers that I put on like my desk when I was doing the Zoom interviews, where I was reminding myself, here's what I'm good at. Like these are people who I've worked with for a significant amount of time or who are my friends, you know, people that love me, who know what I'm good at and why. And having that reminder while I'm trying to prove that to other people was very, very important. So I highly recommend that. That's another reason to find your network and find your mentors. So you make sure that you have other people reminding you how awesome you are. And remember, when you're going through the interview process, you are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Like not every job is going to be the right fit for you. So if you have the ability, and not everybody does at different times of their life. I took like one of the first jobs I could possibly take out of grad school. Like I had to have income. So I'm saying this as somebody who's looking back at my career and moving forward, that make sure that you are asking really good questions about what the culture is going to be like who are you going to be working with, suss it out, because working at somewhere where even if you get good experience, like it will drain you if you're working in an environment, I'm sure you all know that, that is just not well suited to you. Okay, then challenges. I just wanted to kind of pull this out. I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but keep in mind that you need to be really flexible with yourself as you're going through the process, because it takes a lot of time. So you need to be dedicated with that. You need to make sure that you remember that all of these steps are on you. So it is self-directed. Like, yes, you're not going to have, like, yes, the hiring committee might send you reminders, but most of the time they don't. So be prepared, exactly. Be prepared to stay on top of literally everything yourself, and have some kind of accountability built in. Finding fallow time. This was something that was really important to me. And I could talk ad nauseum about this concept of fallow time and slow librarianship, but this was really important to me because especially when I was trying to prepare for like the presentation part of it, yes, it was stuff that I did every single day, but I needed time when I wasn't constantly trying to produce something so that I could actually sit down and just brainstorm. In order to do that, I needed to not overbook myself with, like the interviews and my day-to-day job and the applying for new places. Like I needed to focus in and give myself, time to just be. So the last thing is cultivating boundaries. Like that definitely loops in. Just make sure that you are giving yourself time, making sure you're sleeping and hydrating and like eating. Take snacks when you're doing interviews because they may or may not give them to you. So like all of that is important for your own well-being, outside of whether or not you get that job. Okay, I have some recommended resources that I can definitely, the two of them I used quite a lot when I was going through the process. And then two of the other ones are ones that one of my colleagues is my mentor here at the library has recommended. So ALA Job List, if you haven't used that, make sure that you get that set up to your preferences and get those notifications. I still get those notifications sometimes, and it's actually very useful because then it gives me an idea of like, do I like this job? And so that I can be recommitted to the job that I actually have. The other one is Ask a Manager. I use that a lot when I was preparing for the interviews and also coming up with the questions I wanted to ask. There's also the ACRL log, which my colleague recommended. It also is good for getting ideas of job opportunities, going through the interview process, the mentor-mentee relationship, questions that you might want to consider, all of those. And then Hack Library School, the same thing. It's very, very similar. I'm not as familiar with that one, but it was recommended by someone who knows their stuff. So if you haven't gotten a chance to look into that, I do recommend it. Okay, and then here's my contact information. I also dropped it in the chat, so you all have that. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I just want to open the floor to any questions anybody might have, or if I missed any questions. Oh, Amy, yeah. I agree. Like I could not have kept up to date with who was interviewing me and when if I didn't have that massive spreadsheet. And I do have to say, like, it didn't get as well updated as I wanted as I went through all the job opportunities, but it was definitely a lifesaver. So
Yeah, I have it. I I have it on my Google Drive, and whenever you like click on a new thing, it's like last viewed last week or yesterday or whatever.
yeah.
And so now this spreadsheet just says frequently opened. And I'm like, oh no. I check it at least 5 times a day. It's like it's very,
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah, it is. I also got a link. This was something that I didn't put up because it's not like freely available, but I also remember getting this link to a open Excel file where like librarians or like people who are seeking library jobs or information science jobs like across the spectrum of the types of jobs, they post like where they applied, what kind of questions were asked, those kind of things. So if that's something you're interested in getting, I can definitely send you a link to that as well because it is very useful. Okay, I see that, Amy. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's very useful. And I have to admit that I didn't contribute it, even though it's open access. Like I forgot to enter my own questions, but I kept track of all of my notes and stuff from my interviews. So yeah, I know. I know I'm using other people's work, but not participating. It's the worst.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so does anybody, I really just would love to hear from everybody and see like, how are you doing with the like kind of preparing and or job seeking, or do you have any specific questions about anything I just talked about, or just like searching for jobs in information science overall?
I think Claire posted one in the chat.
Ooh, Claire, yes. Well, that is, I have to say, very difficult. If I've mentioned color coding, I feel like before, I will also include that here. Now, I know that many different people have strategies, and one strategy that I'm trying to work on, because I think it would be really useful, is coming up with a little bit more of an email organization. So where I'm like, tagging things and getting them automatically sent to different folders because keeping track of emails is so hard. And like the further, like the more visible you are, I feel like to people, the more you get contact, which is great. I mean, I say that I just sent you my contact information. I genuinely want you to contact me. But it was definitely like it gets a lot because you also get like notifications from random vendors at a conference you went to 3 years ago. And like there's just a lot of clutter that gets in there. So figuring those kind of strategies out is really important. But for me, the thing that's been most useful is that I use my I before I used like an actual like physical like planner, and I took that literally everywhere when I was working at my last position, and I just like filled that up. I highlighted things in there. I just made sure that I was keeping track of like all my tasks. Once I got here, I've been, I think, a little bit more outside of my office space. And so a physical journal hasn't worked as well, but I do have my calendar, and it is full to the brim with like I've actually come up with different categorizations based on the different parts of my job. So at the end of every year, I have to fill out like a tenure track, sort of like annual report of things that I've done. And as a liaison, those kind of fall under several headings. So like I have to make sure I'm keeping track of the type of instruction I'm doing versus research consultations versus collection, development versus engagement. Engagement is a huge one. This counts as engagement, which is really, really great. And so I have all of those color coded as well as scholarship, because as a tenure track position, I have to produce scholarship and I have to do service. So all of those have different, and then I just have like a miscellaneous like color too that I use for other things, and a private color that I use if it's just like personal and reminding of dinners and stuff. But that color coding system is really great. Keeping as much information on my calendar as possible, while also recognizing that, I mean, if it's personal information, don't put it on there. But and I've been trying to keep track my personal versus my professional, and I use the same device for a lot of those things. So one thing that's been great for organization is I use different browsers, like completely. Like I use, Edge for work, and I use Chrome for my personal. So everything is completely separate. All my bookmarks are separate. And so that has been really helpful. Um, so yeah, so those kind of have been the main things. I know that there are other things out there. I know people who use like notes apps to keep track of things. I'm trying to experiment with a Getty. Is it Getty or so a particular type of Excel file? Amy, you probably know what this is, where you get to like do long-term projects and you color code like how long they're going to take and how they overlap. I can't GAT, maybe Gantz or something like that.
It's
More
something
of this,
like that. I haven't done
yeah.
a lot with that. I just use I just raw dog Excel. I'm just
Yeah.
like, let's just do it.
Yeah. I'll say the only reason why that's really come as a necessity is because I work on scholarship projects that take years, sometimes like months to years. And so keeping track of like what is going on in the works, and like if I've applied for something but haven't heard back, or if I'm working on a proposal but it's not, or like I'm working on like a chapter and it's not due for a while, like keeping track of all of that is really great. So I make sure that I'm not continually adding things to my plate without taking things away. So yeah, that's been really useful. And then when it comes to organization, specifically for liaisons, I have a couple other tips, but so just let me know if any of you are interested in doing that kind of work, or contact me later for that too. That's totally fine. And balancing all the parts of my job, I hear this constantly from mentors, and it's really, really important. you can make this job basically what you want it to be, in the sense of like, I mean, that's one of the great things about being like a liaison. The things that I focus on, obviously that depends on the needs of my, I wouldn't say constituents, that's not the word, but the needs of my, like CCI folks. Depends on where I put my efforts, but really it's about like, what am I passionate about? And how can I turn that into scholarship and service, and then also my day-to-day job. So, trying to figure out a way to balance that in, finding time to write is the hardest thing. One tip I have is find other people to write with you, because otherwise, if I didn't work on projects with other people when it comes to scholarship, I don't think I would get any publications, because I need built-in reminders that like things are due. So okay, I answered. Hopefully that was helpful, Claire, because I just kept going. I'm getting yes, there's 50 million things. Yes, I agree. It's hard out there. Okay, Sydney. Similar interview process. Like, would the interview process be different for someone looking at a job in like cataloging or acquisitions and subject librarian? Oh, that's a good point. It depends on the size of the institution that you're going to. So, for example, I worked at so this is my second faculty position at an academic library, so I can speak to that. When I went through the last process, I was going for at a small institution that was rural, and so every librarian, even if you were the head of like the technical services versus collection services versus, I was instructional services, we all went through the same process. Like, we still had to be interviewed very similarly. We had to meet with like the provost. We met with the director of the library. We still had to do phone interviews and, Zoom interviews, in-person interviews. We still had to present, but usually it was also, because it was so small, like everybody had to be a liaison too. And so that meant that like the technical services librarian still had to do some kind of presentation about, it might have been, I think when I was there and we hired someone, it was about something to do with like obviously technical services. Then I came in and I basically had to do the same format, but I was doing a presentation on like how I would teach a Comp 1 class. So it was the presentation topic would be a little different, but I imagine you would still go through a fairly grueling process. Now for like a larger institution, it might be a little bit more differentiated, except now that I think about it, I have like been in on interviews with like other like faculty positions in particular. I've been there for staff positions too, and those have been similar, except for possibly the presentation. Like, that might not, like, the things they were being asked to do were a little different, but definitely, I would say probably for the staff position, it's a little shorter. I don't think you meet with as many people. And so with faculty, it's like a longer process, because you're also meeting with like key stakeholders in the areas that you would be working with, those kind of things. And within the library too. And so, yeah, I would say it's pretty similar. I just sort of like wandered off into the weeds about trying to remember all the interviews I've been a part of, as hiring versus as actually going through the process as an applicant. But yeah, I would say it's pretty similar. I mean, now if you're doing public library, that's going to be different. Like, you're still going to have like a hiring committee, but they're going to be like, usually you don't have to meet with as many people, like, because they're overseen by like city council. So, and I imagine you don't have to go through the process of meeting with city council in the way that you do meeting with the provost and the director. Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. I hope that was helpful. Okay. Oh, and I think the homework would be different. So like, I remember when we were hiring at my last institution, a staff member who was going to be doing more like cataloging, the things that they had to do for that, like the homework that we then looked at, was obviously something to do with how they would classify specific items. So that was a little different. Okay. And then we have Amy, working in academic libraries as a cataloger, and I don't know what to do for a presentation. Is it just how great you are and things you would want to do well? And I guess, so you usually don't do the presentation until like the final round of interviews. So they will give you a prompt. That is a requirement. Every like hiring committee I've been a part of, we've had to give a prompt, right? And it's beforehand too. So it might not be like weeks beforehand, but it will definitely be beforehand. And I imagine, you know, that when it will have something to do with cataloging procedures. I mean, they also, like, the point is they're going to give you something that actually pertains to your day-to-day job, because otherwise, why would they do it? Like, I know on hiring committees I've been a part of, like, I'm a part of a hiring committee right now, and we were just talking about, like, what kinds of what are we going to ask people to present on, and we were making sure that it was about, obviously we looked back at the job description to make sure that it directly correlated with that. So it's not going to be just the ones that I've had that have been kind of difficult have been more like theory based versus like my, you know, day-to-day job. So I can't say that they won't ask you to do that, but it depends on, you know, what the actual hiring committee and their components and, you know, what they want you to prove, because that's what the presentation is. It's like proving your ability, and it opens up questions, which is, you know, usually a presentation is like 20-30 minutes long, and then the rest of the hour is questions from people. So be prepared for that. Okay. Any other questions? These have all been really good.
I'm just curious about that, like, presentation part of it, just because, like, I've never done that necessarily before. Like, I'm very good. I like to pride myself as being a good interviewee. Like, I can talk eloquently about things that I've done and things that I would like to do in the future, and like my skills and all that stuff. But yeah, I've never had to do that part of it, like creating a presentation. So that's gonna be a very new experience for me.
Well, I can tell you that it really depends. I mean, first off, people want you to succeed. Like, when you're coming in, yes, it's really intimidating, but like the hiring committee, they want, as someone who's been on quite a few hiring committees, we want to make it challenging because we need to weed out people who aren't going to be capable of doing the job, obviously. But we also don't want to scare people away. Like, we're trying to find a good balance, even in the questions that we're asking. And so I will say, oh yeah, good point, Claire. It really is teaching. I will say that. So if you have done any teaching at all, you know, that might be helpful. The other thing that I usually do that is helpful, because I actually taught as the instruction librarian at my last place. I taught new librarians coming in how, including our cataloger, our technical services librarian, who's very, very dear. I miss her all the time. She's still alive. She's just at my last institution, to be clear. But anyway, I created a kind of a workshop that they would go through to talk about how to present, like how to come up with your presentation for, like, basically your teaching persona. So it's not like something that's completely different from you. You find the things that you know you're good at. So like, I imagine like you're coming with very specific skills from the job that you currently have, and the interest, like a strong interest in cataloging in this particular job. You're not just going through this process just to get a job. Like, it's this particular type of job. So highlighting that passion, even if it looks a little different from, like, say, clearly I'm somebody who's quite loud and quite like energetic. And so like when I present, it's going to look different from yours, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be effective in that moment. It's all about choosing what it is specifically about you that you want them to walk away from, you know, like with that understanding, and just kind of sticking to that. And also finding someone in the room that looks like especially sympathetic. I try to be that person when I'm, you know, in those presentations. So you can kind of like focus in on one or two people. So you don't have to feel, you know, like it's just a bunch of strangers, because it is a bunch of strangers, but usually there's at least one nice person in that room. So,
Just
and
one.
if you've talked, yeah, and if you talk to, well, maybe just one, if you talk to the hiring committee before, maybe there's a personality that stood out to you that you really liked or something. And so that that can also be helpful. And practice. Like, I, even as somebody who has taught like hundreds, almost thousands of classes at this point, like, I have to practice. And I have to have like very good, like very clear sort of like outline of what I want to cover, or else I won't cover it. Because as you can tell, I just go off into the weeds if possible. So hopefully that helps. If you need somebody to, like, you know, be your like audience member, to practice the presentation, just let me know. I'm happy to do that because I've been there. I know what that's like. Okay, Claire, great question. What's my favorite part of my job? Honestly, this. So like any opportunity I get where I get to be, I mean, obviously not quite face to face, but be with the people that I am like here to like work with to support. Like my job as a liaison is to be your advocate. So any opportunity that I have to be able to meet you all at like a human level and understand what you actually need versus just like what I think that you need is very important. And it's something that really like fuels me. There's a reason why I became a liaison because I enjoy people and I enjoy kind of just being the person that people come to for questions and for things. It's very satisfying. And I think part of that is also because I genuinely like find the work that you all do interesting. I've been there, like I've been in you, even as I've been very clear that I don't want to do cataloging, like I'm still very interested. Amy and I've talked about this before. Like I'm still very interested in why you want to do that. Like what draws you to that? What is, you know, what is interesting about you all as individuals? I love those conversations. So yeah, that's my favorite job. That's why I enjoy doing research consultations, why I enjoy doing presentations, teaching in classes. That's fun. I guess the only parts that I are really trying for me is when it's just me and my computer staring at each other. And then I'm like, great, we were going through and looking at approval plans for you know, one of our parts of our collection this morning, and I was like, I have to stare at the same Excel file for like 2 hours before I even remotely understand what's happening. And so, yeah, but good question. Thank you, Claire. I think we have time for a couple more if anybody has other questions.
So I think oh, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm the only like person who's going to be graduating May.
Yeah.
So like for people who are still in school and will still be in school, like do you have like a timeline of like when you should start looking for jobs and when you should worry about not getting interviews?
Yeah.
Like,
okay, so that's a very good question. Now, obviously, I'm speaking from, you know, 3 different academic specific job search, not just as the hiring. I'm talking about like being an applicant. 3 different rounds that I was going through. One thing to keep in mind, if you now I don't know if everybody here, can you give me like a thumbs up if you are actually going or interested in academic librarianship? Okay, I've got Amy.
I don't know if
If
anyone
you're
else. Sydney,
Oh, Sydney. Okay, cool.
Claire's
Claire,
trying to
it's
figure it
okay.
out.
And you know, hopefully I didn't scare you away from academic librarianship. But I will say, as somebody who's also worked as a school library and worked as a public library, like it really honestly depends on your individual like interest. And honestly, I think I probably at some point will retire and go back and work at a public library. Like that's my goal, is to be able to end up
Be that
where I
old
started,
lady.
kind of thing. Yeah, I will be that old lady, you know. So anyway, so cool. So we have a few people in here. So this might be slightly different. Okay, so just keep that in mind from going through the public library system. The thing to keep in mind about academic libraries, it takes forever because they have to go through all of these loops and get approved. So like I'm working on a search committee right now where you know, we go through all these processes. We had to sit down as a hiring, first we had to get the hiring committee, and then we had to sit down and we had to you know, come up with the job description, and then we had to send that out, recruit, but before we could even send it out and recruit, we had to get you know, like our HR and administration at the library, and then the university HR and administration approval. And so every step that you go through the process, it has to go all the way up and then all the way back down, which is why it takes a long time. So I would
bureaucracy.
say, yeah, bureaucracy, right? Oh, Kafka would be so proud. But I would say that keep in mind that when you apply for something, you might not hear back from them for a month. And that's because we open up like usually, and we usually keep job postings open for at least a month, if not more, because we want to get as many people as possible to apply to it. And so if you see like a very short job posting, it's probably because they already have somebody in mind, or you know, like it's more of an eternal search that happens too. So yeah, so you'll apply to something, not hear back for like a month, and then you'll get contacted. You'll get an email saying, hey, just want you to know, like, we're interested in you. We want to, keep you. You might not hear if there are many jobs that I didn't hear from because I just didn't make it into like one of the rounds. Because you go through several rounds. You like apply and then you'll hear back and they'll be like, okay, we want to do the initial round of interviews, which is usually a phone interview. You'll do that and then you'll wait. You may hear, usually if you make it to the phone interview, it depends on the institution, but usually we'll tell people after that, even if they're not moving forward. But you might not, because if you're applying for a larger institution, you might not hear back unless you're moving forward. Then they'll move you forward to that like final round, the people that they actually bring on campus usually, except if you're in the middle of a pandemic and then it's over Zoom. But they'll bring you on campus. It will only be 3 to 4 people usually, depending on finances. You come for an all-day thing. It will take them several weeks not only to do those interviews, but then to get back and like make their choices for who they want to bring. And then they have to go through that whole round again. So that's probably going to take at least another month. So keep in mind that, and then once you get the job offer, then you got to negotiate. And that's part of it that I was not well prepared for when I first started this process. Like it was only really until this job. And even then there's so much more that I have to learn when it comes to negotiations for like, not just salary, but like other benefits, your start date, all of those things. So then you have to do those negotiations and that has to get approved. And then they have to go through the process again. So like I initially applied for this job. I believe it was like April. And then I didn't actually get brought in for a final interview until July. And then we negotiated in August and I didn't get my actual like packet of like, yes, you've been hired. Here's how we're going to proceed to get you on board until like halfway through September, almost to October. And my start date was September 15th. So like that kept having to be pushed back. So, I mean, that's a good 6 months. So I would really recommend that you start applying. I mean, now pay attention to the level of position that they're talking about, because a lot of them, if they're not entry level, they probably won't hire somebody right out of grad school unless you have experience working in that particular thing, either as a staff member or just like you have been a librarian and not you just got this additional degree. So keep that in mind. Mainly go for those entry level positions, which usually pay less, I would say, as somebody who just left an entry level position. And so that might be the case, but those, they're still going to be long rounds, but they might be a little bit less than say like doing a tenure track position, which again might be entry level depending on the institution you go to. But that's the other thing you got to decide: are you willing? Do you want to do tenure track? Because if you don't go for a tenure track job because it'll just give you heartache. So, I worked at a faculty position and I actually like enjoyed it at my last institution that wasn't tenure track. And then I chose to go for a tenure track position. So that's a whole nother conversation we can have about which level you might want to do. And if you're interested in that conversation, I mean, I've probably really pumped it up, like tenure faculty versus non-tenure faculty, like which one do you want to do? Yeah, I know that sounds really exciting conversation, but it was something that I had to do. And I had to go through to figure out which level I wanted to go through. And how much, whether or not it was worth it. It was like a cost benefit analysis, really. Where was I going with this story? We were talking about
when to apply.
Okay. So thank you. So I would say start at least 6 months before you graduate to actually like submitting your first applications. Be patient. Like I do send like follow-up like emails sometimes if I haven't heard from somebody for a while and they were like, hey, we're going to contact you to set something up. And then I don't hear for a couple of weeks and I'll be like, hey, just want you to know, like I have something coming up. I just want to make sure it doesn't conflict. Something like that and usually hiring committees are pretty responsive, or they try to be. They'll have at least one responsive member on it. Usually that's the nice person that you want to look at when you're doing your presentation. So yeah, do definitely at least 6 months in advance, because then you can say, here is the date that I actually graduate. And they'll have that in hand. So that's my recommendation. How soon before graduating would you suggest submitting application? Oh yeah, 6 months. So I would say, yeah. So by the end of your like second to last semester. for
Yeah,
sure.
that's what I'm doing. So and
Yeah.
now I'm just starting to hear back from people. So
Yes. Yeah.
mhm.
So yeah, and keep in mind that everybody who goes through this process, it's nerve-wracking. It's scary. When I was going through this process just a year and a half ago for this position and a few other ones that I applied for, like I was still scared. And I already had a job. And I was I was now going into my like mid-career. And so I knew what I was capable of and I was still nervous. So like it's okay to be nervous. Just make sure that you find people who will talk you through it. And that you again hydrate. Can't say this enough. Hydrate. There were some of those interviews I went on that I forgot. They gave me a tiny water bottle and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is like one gallon. Like so Sydney, yeah, I mean it is like I just said, like it is a little it's intimidating. It's a little terrifying. I show just as like a horror story, and then but I've had a lot of interviews that went really well, right? And so they're not all going to be the same. It depends on the people involved. I had one which was like a huge red flag, where they showed up. Well, I showed up for the interview and nobody met me at the like I had to wander around the library trying to find the person I was supposed to meet with. I was like, this is not the place that I want to work. Like
No,
they were
no.
not prepared for me. And there for other reasons that I won't share, there was like a good reason not to do it. I also was in one where the hiring committee, not every like no one from the hiring committee was there except for one. And I was like, there's like 6 people on the hiring committee and nobody could show up. That's not good. Like they're overworking you, or you're apathetic, one of the two. So keep in mind that there are probably going to be some some red
Red
flags
flags.
along the way. So one thing that was important to me is every time I would go through the interview process, I would actually do a little reflection. So I would have like a sheet that I would create that would be like, here are the questions that I'm getting from the committee. Here are my questions that I want to ask the committee, and then here, like this is just like what did it feel like? Like what was the experience like? What did I see that I liked? What did I see that I didn't like? Because that when you're comparing job opportunities, that's going to be really important. So, oh yeah, please everybody, would we have those stakeholder or those research presentations? We really want people to come to those at Hodges when we're like bringing people on board. So please feel free when you get that notification to like come. We would love to see you there. So.
Calantha, if you wouldn't mind, could you send me like email invites so I can forward that to people?
Oh, yes. Yeah. We don't have any right this second, unless
Okay.
Gabby, I'm wrong. But if I don't know when the next one is going to be, but when it does happen, I'll be sure to send those on to you, Amy.
Yeah, I can put that in the announcement section of our emails so we can reach a lot of people.
Awesome. Yeah. I think we're doing web developers right now. We're hiring those. And then there's one liaison position that I'm working on, but we haven't brought people on board on campus yet. So yeah, but I'll definitely, once it gets to that place, I would love to send those out so people know. And like just in general, I just want to say that I really appreciate how like energetic the master students in particular in the library school, or I call it library school, the information science school, are when it comes to getting on the ground training. Like that is really, really important. So even if you don't have a DA chip, still being able to show up and you're interested in academic librarianship, still being able to show up and kind of just observe that goes a long way, both from like our perspective of seeing people being interested in these jobs, but then also from your perspective, because then you learn how it goes. So yeah, I think that's everything that I had. I just wanted to say I just really appreciate you all and thank you so much for coming. This was a lot of fun, and I'm very happy to send my slides or anything else, Amy, if you'd like them.
Yeah, sounds good. And then I'll just give a little plug. So Calantha kind of touched on the like negotiation process. We had a whole talk with Dr. Patillo about that, about how to do that and like best practices and how to, it was called You Don't Ask, You Don't Get. It was great. It's recorded. It's on our Vol link on both the ALA and SLA Vol link pages. So if you are interested in learning more about that, it was highly informative. Please check that out. It's a very good companion piece to this section.
Yeah.
So thank you,
Yeah.
Calantha. We really appreciate it.
Of course, it was an absolute pleasure. And hopefully I'll get to see some of you at the end of the semester in April when we do our next coffee with Calantha. So,
Yeah, it's
um,
gonna be in person. I
and we'll
can't
actually
wait. It's
have
gonna be so much
coffee.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be great. We're gonna have a good time. Okay, well, thank you
Okay.
everyone for coming. You have a great
Thank
rest of your
you.
day.